But we're so glad to have Nora Benavidez, who is on the ACS New York chapter board and is the director of U.S. Free Expression Programs at PEN America, to be talking to us today about disinformation and promoting media literacy. So thank you so much, Nora, and please take it away.
Thank you so much, Jake. Can everyone hear me? I hope it sounds all right. Jake, will you just let me know? We sound good?
Yeah, I can hear you, and let's see what the people are saying. If you all could hear, if you could, perfect. Yes, people can hear us. We are good to go.
Oh, great. Well, it's great to be here with all of you. This is honestly one of my very first, a few of the first of my Zoom facilitation. So I love doing this. It's very surreal being a sort of bodiless voice for you, but I'll try to turn on my camera at some point so I can say hi. You know, I'm thrilled to be presenting this. I'm the vice chair of the New York ACS lawyer chapter, and I have been a member of ACS since I became a lawyer over 6 years ago. And so I feel like I'm one of the evangelists for ACS and how tremendous their programming is. And I'm really excited to be presenting this topic with you today. I'm the director of US Free Expression Programs at PEN America. And you know, we have been working on researching and tracking the effect of disinformation for several years now on US politics and society at large. But to be honest, it has felt like in the context now of coronavirus, there is sort of this new and kind of different urgency around understanding why disinformation is such a problem, and in, you know, understanding how it actually is playing out in the COVID-19 context. So I wanted to first give you a little bit of a roadmap of what we're going to cover. Let's see. There we go. Okay, great. You know, I wanted to just start today, if our aim is to understand how disinformation is playing out in this context and how you can help sort of build and empower yourself to understand media literacy generally, as well as then targeted media literacy skills, I thought it's best to start with just a background on PEN America's work in this space. Then I wanted to be able to walk you through what disinformation looks like, how it gets created, how it gets distributed online, and what the disinformation and coronavirus nexus looks like right now, in which we're seeing a lot of misleading and false information. And I thought it would be helpful during that to give you a few concrete examples of what this looks like, how this kind of information is proliferating online right now, and how people are sharing it. And then finally, I want to be able to give you some really concrete tips for how you can push back and help prevent the spread of this disinformation deluge right now. And then, of course, reserving as much time as possible, I would love to have a little bit of a discussion and time for questions. So just to start, you know, PEN America is a membership organization. We were founded actually right after World War I, when writers came together very worried about the way words might be censored and the way words could be weaponized in sort of furtherance of political and personal ends for various leaders around the world. And over the years, we have always maintained a mission that is focused on working to elevate and promote the freedom to write at the nexus of literature, human rights, and free expression. And so baked into our mission is language from a charter that our board put together in 1948, which I always find interesting to go back to, because it says that what we call for is a defense against mendacious publication, deliberate falsehood, and distortion of facts for political and personal ends. And at least in the context of our disinformation work, I always think how interesting and relevant, kind of eerily relevant, our charter feels if we were to substitute some of those words like mendacious publication or distortion of facts for the word disinformation. And so as a free expression organization, much of our work over the last few years has been trying to understand the effect of this deluge on society and on various communities around the United States. In 2017, we released our first report on this. And I will say, you know, we worked on that in 2016. It was actually before I came on to PEN, but one of the things that we did was, you know, we referred to this phenomenon as fake news. And frankly, it was before Donald Trump had really kind of claimed that term, and the administration had claimed that term as its own, and has taken on its own kind of strange set of connotations. And so faking news was really our first report in which we stressed that this is a problem, and that these kind of deluge of fraudulent information that is being then proliferated on social media platforms and throughout our lives that we're now privy to constantly because of the digital age is really just an onslaught for us. And one of the solutions that we had stressed at the time was that news literacy programs could be among some of the more promising approaches to addressing the long-term harms posed by fraudulent news. And mainly because they hold the potential to reshape people's attitudes towards media. Some of what we found at that time was that the spread of false information, especially under the guise of news, erodes people's trust in media, which is, I think, kind of intuitive. And this deteriorating trust then in somehow not believing what we see when news reports on things actually then increases our inability to distinguish facts or truth from lies. And those are sort of phrases that I consider on the far ends of the spectrum, because part of what we're actually seeing now is sometimes the facts are actually, wedged into pieces of reporting to add credence to certain types of articles that we might otherwise dismiss. But because there's a kernel in there that we somehow believe, we will take things more as true. And so the threat when disinformation campaigns launched really and started proliferating is that we feel, and I have seen, that they attack our kind of shared factual knowledge that undergirds the way we're able to really debate policies, the way we can believe what our leaders are saying. And ultimately, I think what this does is it really creates a kind of polarization between various groups in the United States. In 2019, then, we revisited the issue, but it was in light of the 2018 midterm election. And, it was interesting because we saw different things. It was a very different world by that time in the disinformation space. People by 2019 were really kind of on board. The effects of the disinformation campaigns on the 2016 election had absolutely already come to the foreground and had been discussed, debated, and people were very worried about that. By 2019, we found a few new things examining the effect of disinformation on the midterm election in 2018. And I'll walk you through just a few of those. One, we found that there were a few different types of disinformation campaigns being launched, frankly, with different aims. There were, of course, still factions of Russian disinformation that continued to threaten the 2018 election. But there were also what I call the long game interests of Russian agents that were promoting these types of campaigns. And it wasn't to just influence the American electoral process, but it was really to stoke polarization and to sow distrust. And at the same time, we saw an increase in domestic American disinformation, where American political actors were utilizing fraudulent news and disinformation against their political opponents, which was really fascinating. And throughout all of this, tech companies seemed to be responsive, especially in the wake of questions about what had happened in 2016. But the results have been very mixed. And a lot of important advances actually have been made for the social media policies by the platforms to really try to be more accountable, but they have also caused new problems. And there's sort of this balance where I think some of the platforms wanted to ensure transparency, but have not moved far enough. We are still seeing Facebook, for example, absolutely unwilling to flag or remove content in advertising for political or election-related content if it contains false information. And that in and of itself has proven a very big problem for Americans. One of the fourth thing that we identified in this report was the issue of micro-targeting, which You know, in the context of coronavirus, I'm not sure it's as relevant perhaps, but it's worth noting to really kind of understand the phenomenon, because micro-targeting capabilities on these platforms really, I think, weaponized disinformation in ways that probably create the greatest problem that we're seeing, which is where very, very small segmented groups of voters or others online can be targeted with what I call laser-like efficiency, where content is tailored and then targeted for specific people. So what you might see on your Facebook feed, for example, that is absolutely, or it could be targeted for you by whether it's Russian agents, even domestic agents that are trying to make you believe certain things. And the ability to reach very, very small segments of voters while at the same time remaining invisible to the wider public that this is actually happening is honestly, the phenomenon is amazing in many ways, because it means that you may not know that what you're seeing is different than what your friend is seeing, that what you are seeing is different than what your wife or your husband is seeing. And so you may be taking something that you're seeing as gospel, digesting and internalizing it, while someone else is doing the same thing with content that has been absolutely and differently tailored for their interests. And so throughout all of this, the largest concern that I have had in sort of watching what disinformation has done is the way it poses the potential to become a new normal. You know, when we wrote our 2019 report, Truth on the Ballot, we said that there is a risk that disinformation could become the new normal. And I think in the little over 12 months since that time, we've actually seen it become the new normal. News articles about disinformation proliferate all the time, and yet the problem has not gone away. And the fixes that various entities, whether it's governmental bodies or even the platforms, have tried to promote, as a free expression organization, PEN America has been very wary of the way these responses actually have unintended consequences. I'll give you just a really easy example. Recently in the coronavirus context, for example, the Newark, New Jersey officials said that they would start prosecuting people who posted false information about coronavirus. This to me, you know, it's sort of a classic American take on criminalizing speech. And it's an interesting dance that we do at PEN America, because on the one hand, we absolutely believe in and promote the notion that people should be able to engage in discourse, both online and offline, that you should be able to post what you want, that those beliefs, whatever it is you're sharing, those are core aspects of free expression. And at the same time, we are just seeing this absolute deluge of what information is hitting us, that it's hitting us in ways that then lead us to believe or not believe certain things. And so we've been very careful in thinking through what the solution should look like. Oh, here's just a little bit of an example of things, if you'll see on your screen, of issues that we saw in 2016 and 2018. So one of the things that in thinking through what these solutions or tools could be for people is we have always felt that equipping people with the tools to assess information and discern truth or discern facts from falsehoods is an important way to fight disinformation. And so earlier this year, we launched a new program. It's called Knowing the News, and we're very excited about it, especially pre-coronavirus, I will tell you. Our plan was to work around the country in the lead up to the 2020 election, working with communities and with newsrooms to help people understand how the news gets made. Frankly, that's really to try to facilitate conversation between hyperlocal journalists and newsrooms and communities where people feel a sense of distrust in the news, and to help people then mainly have tools to better discern what misleading content looks like in the lead up to the 2020 election. And, you know, this work is obviously still very important. And needless to say, we have started moving a lot of our work now to these digital type formats, which I have to say is incredibly surreal. But as we're doing that, you know, I felt like there was sort of this unique moment for us to apply a lot of the expertise that we have developed in the media literacy context to what's happening now with coronavirus. And so I want to just dive in and, you know, even before, let's say, many of us were sitting at home online, Americans have been overwhelmed for years now by the constant flow of news feeds and alerts. This is just a kind of good snapshot on the screen of some research from the Pew Research Center about adults and where they get their information. And as you can see, they published this report about the concern that the role of social media plays as a news source. Because I don't know about you, but we're spending more and more time online, especially now as many of us are working from home. And in doing so, what we're doing is we're actually getting information, not from news sites, but we're getting them from links that people post on social media. So, one of our distinctions always is that we say social media, for example, is a gateway. It is not the actual source. If someone has posted a news article on Facebook and it's in your feed, that isn't an actual source. It's just a gateway for you then to click on a link, let's say, and to then go to the source. And here's just another snapshot of all of the different pathways to news. As recently as 2019, it was 52% of Americans, that's over half, said that they are getting their news from the pathways of Facebook. And then 71% that they're actually just using that platform. So this is a lot. We're really all turning to these platforms to be able to use as gateways. And one of the things that I would just, as a prelude, if you will, to what our basic media literacy tips are, is I would ask yourself where you receive news and information. I don't know about you, but I think just even understanding the basic differences between news articles that are basic reporting and then op-eds. Are you finding that you go on Twitter every day and that's where you find links? It's interesting mainly to pose those questions because it helps you then learn to unplug, whether it is learning to differentiate the social media platforms that you use, or even to more proactively search and seek out new types of information from, let's say, radio and talk radio programs or TV. Are you seeing a lot of sponsored content? These are just things to begin thinking about. So what does disinformation actually look like, and how do we define it? When we started this work, as I mentioned earlier, we referred to terms like fraudulent news, fake news. We used the term misinformation and disinformation. And I have to say, there was a time years ago where these terms were used much more interchangeably. And people have now tried, at least experts in this space, to give some very agreed upon language for what the different terms mean. So disinformation, as we define it in our reports and our research, is demonstrably false information that is being presented as fact with the intention to deceive the public. And the intent to deceive is really the crux of disinformation. We'll see examples of misinformation, people sharing things that frankly are just inaccurate. And a lot of times that doesn't have any ill intent at all. It's either false and mistaken reporting perhaps, or otherwise just wrong information. When people then share it with the intent to deceive others, that's when it then turns into disinformation. So I might kind of reiterate this over and over again because they are useful distinctions to know about. Disinformation isn't new. It's been historically used to manipulate public opinion, and I will not give you a history lesson at all. I pulled some of these for you on your screen as just an example of all of the different ways throughout history that we've seen propaganda and words be used to sensationalize people, to lead them to believe something, whether it is, people wanting to denigrate their political opponents perhaps, or create larger confusion about things that are happening in society. But I think one of the most basic questions for today is, why are we susceptible to disinformation? Why are we so susceptible as people? And, there are there's sort of like expert terms for it, but at the end of the day, I don't think we are naturally trained to be suspicious and reject the things we see. And yet, what we call the illusory truth effect is that the more we encounter something, the more we believe it, which means that even when something has been debunked and we are shown a debunked fact, it actually has been shown not to help alter our belief. It actually sometimes leads us to further double down on believing. So Facebook did an experiment, for example, on the illusory truth effect. And participants were shown, this was right after the 2016 election, participants were shown true and fake headlines on Facebook. And they were asked to evaluate these for truth. And they were then distracted and shown the same headlines, throughout several minutes. And then when participants were familiar with the story, whether they had known from the beginning that something was true or false, then when they revisit it, no matter what, they found that it was more probable that they found it to be true. And the researchers at Facebook had said every time a lie is repeated, it appears slightly more plausible to some people. It's sort of like our memories play tricks, and that naturally we just, it's not very reliable. And even disclaimers, for example, even disclaimers on Facebook, where you can see a pop-up that says, oh, this piece of news article or link has been disputed by fact checkers. Honestly, what Facebook has found is that even for some people, that did not trigger more skepticism in the piece. So psychologically, we're kind of up against a lot, I think. And the phases of disinformation are one of the best ways for us to begin combating it. I would say, we do want to spend just a few minutes going through what the phases of disinformation are, from creation to then distribution. And I'll give you an example that we often talk about in the context of our election-related media literacy work. So back in 2016, a news hoax website published a headline that many of you probably heard about. It was saying that the Pope had endorsed Trump. In fact, the quote from the Pope, it was a real quote, but it was spliced together and manipulated. So that the comment had originally been something the Pope had said about the probable inability of the FBI to prosecute Hillary Clinton over her emails. And instead, it was spliced and edited so that the quote read that he seemed to be supporting and endorsing Trump. And it was interesting because, like I mentioned at the very beginning of the workshop, a lot of times disinformation begins with a kernel of truth, and then it is spun and it is distorted. And in this example, the Pope did actually comment about the principal two candidates in the 2016 election. But that information was then manipulated to create a kind of false narrative. The agent who created this actually remains unknown, but it was the news article was reproduced and reproduced. BuzzFeed found that it was the most widely shared election story on Facebook throughout the entire 2016 election. It had almost 1 million engagements that people liked, commented on, and shared. And so in a way, when we think about the way we as individuals are all participating in being online, in being online users on platforms like Facebook and Twitter, I think we actually all become publishers to some degree. When we post what others may be sharing, or when we repost things without even our own framework. So in that context, we kind of have our own responsibility to think about what we're sharing, and frankly, to be conscious about, if I'm going to share something, I should from the outset be assessing whether something is, is it authentic? Has it been manipulated? Those are questions that we'll get into. And so here's just an example of some of the emotional and mental effects that disinformation have on us to help facilitate why it's so successful as a campaign. I think that in the context of coronavirus, not everything shared, and I want to be really clear, not everything that's being shared all the time that people are taking as real is disinformation. But facts are, I would say, rarely as important as right now, as during a health crisis. The public is hungry for information. I don't know about you, but I truly need to know, can I go to the grocery store? Is there going to be food? What are the risks of taking an Uber and being in such close quarters to someone? Those are health questions. And if you just Google any of those questions, a deluge of information will come up. And oftentimes it's conflicting in what different people come up with. Even scientists and medical professionals, as we have all seen over the last several weeks, as the coronavirus really comes to the United States and came here in different states, medical professionals are still honestly learning new things about COVID-19 every day. And so finding reliable information that is grounded in science, grounded in health, can be very challenging. What I've noticed is people come to me and they ask, can I trust this? And I'm not so sure it's can I trust this, but it's what is the process that we can begin using, each of us, as a kind of practice in our digital lives to be able to check what we're seeing. Because some of what we're seeing is misleading. And then some of it is honestly just mistake and people getting it wrong. So we need to become the stopgaps, the valves that stop sharing, that stop promoting information absent fact checking. I'll give you a few examples of what's going on. One example of disinformation that has happened recently in the United States in the coronavirus context was text messages, thousands of them, were sent to people in the US, urging them to go out and buy bulk food and supplies to prepare for a quarantine. Now, I just want to stop there and just think about how you might feel if you received that. I know that I received a text message, not this one, but I received one a couple of weeks ago saying, go outside while you still can. And it was very incendiary to even get something like that. Well, a lot of people actually ended up in the reporting afterwards from receiving these text messages about the need to go buy bulk food and supplies. People actually then, it kind of led to a kind of mania and hysteria. They were created, these text messages, to mislead people. And it seemed like the apparent intent was to overwhelm our country's food infrastructure. We don't actually know what some of the origin was, but it is one of those examples that I think we need to be aware of so that we become those stopgaps. And if we get that, don't share it, don't promote it. Instead, try to fact check it. In another instance in Europe, a video went viral, and it was showing people in sort of this like feeding, shopping frenzy at a grocery store. It looked like this, honestly, it was a mob scene, and it was in Germany. What we ended up finding out when we looked into this, though, is that that video was taken several years ago, and then it was edited, and it was shared on WhatsApp groups, making it seem like it was coronavirus-related shopping in Europe. And so again, it had this sort of what we believe is the intent to mislead people, for them to think that they have to go out now and buy a bunch of food in bulk to prepare for the kind of apocalypse that we all worry and suspect might be coming. And so those are a couple of examples of disinformation. And then there are other examples of misinformation. And remember the difference, right? It's sort of that intent. What is the intent behind the proliferation of this information? One example was a rumor that saline could eliminate coronavirus if you rinse your mouth with salt water. And experts were pretty quick a few weeks ago to refute that as inaccurate, but people believed it. And that was circulated thousands and thousands of times. Another example was on Facebook, someone posted, and it was shared over 500 times, which isn't that much, but it's still plenty, I think, that scientists were developing a vaccine for coronavirus, and that we could all just sort of sit back and not be worried because the vaccine would be ready very soon. This was also inaccurate. Frankly, when I investigated this, I still am not sure if this was what we might classify disinformation or misinformation. But either way, this proliferation of false content, and during a moment where we are all in kind of heightened emotional moments and states of being, they're leading people to adapt their attitudes and their behaviors. And this is all on the basis of inaccurate information, ignoring even the intent behind it. So based on misleading information, people might feel worried about needing to get supplies, when in fact there's no threat of dwindling supplies. As another example, people might believe that there's no risk to going outside, when in fact social distancing absolutely helps flatten the curve of coronavirus spreading. People could frankly have no ill intention at all. They might share false content out of a sense of what I think is almost a civic duty, like, let me share this with my community to help. I know at Penn America, even we on staff have fallen prey to this. I have fallen prey to wanting to believe something I see. And instead of sharing that automatically, we must develop practices of beginning to stop, think about the source and the veracity of what we're seeing, and then try to fact check it if we can before we share it. A lot of times people believe the thing they read that then they share. And it's only later where someone else says, I don't know if that's actually accurate, and a third party will check it. So I don't know if you guys saw on the screen here are a couple of really different examples of false and misleading content. On the left is an article from The Onion. The Onion is a satire news outlet that produces false content, which oftentimes is very funny. You know, one of the questions that we often get is, how do you think about satire and humor in the context of disinformation? And it is absolutely protected speech. People should absolutely have the ability to make jokes. I have spent my evenings now looking at TikTok to watch what videos are, you know, cropping up, and so much still remains satire. And it doesn't really move into the realm of disinformation, but it's something for you to be aware of as readers. And then there's this gorgeous image of the swans in the Venice canals. I wish I could figure out how to have people raise their hands, because I would love to know who saw these. These were beautiful images. Honestly, I put a draft together in my own Instagram account because I wanted to promote how beautiful this was, and I was so excited. To give you a little bit of background, these images were of sort of cropping up around social media and online. They were images from, let's say, swans in the Venice canals, dolphins. There were then images of elephants in fields in China. And people said that, oh, the one silver lining in this pandemic, if there is one at all, is that climate change is sort of receding as an issue for us. Animals are bouncing back. We are running free. Animals are running free in this sort of humanless world. And none of these images, the swans, dolphins, elephants, none of them were factual. And it was funny because I talked with a few people that I work with, and all of us had wanted to share this swan picture because we just thought it was so beautiful. And it was not that it was misleading and created to be misleading perhaps, but swans actually often swim around this one area in the Venice canals. It's actually slightly south of where most of the motorboats are. So it's misleading because this is no phenomenon that is unique to what's happening with coronavirus.
Nora, if I could just hop in here,
Sure.
People can raise their hands. So if you click on the participant tab or actually no, because you're sharing your screen, but it is possible for people on the line. I believe if you go to the controls in your webinar, if you're using the online system, to raise your hand, and once we get to the Q&A portion, I'll be able to unmute you and allow you to ask questions kind of live. But there is an opportunity for people to raise their hands, so feel free to utilize that if you'd like to.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, we're kind of rounding out things and reaching, you know, the crux of these tips that we have been putting together, and the kind of what I call a toolkit for people in their defense training against disinformation. And I think the question is, in the middle of all of this, what do you do? Some of the most basic instructions and recommendations, honestly, are in the context of just being an online user. And the most basic step really is taking control of your digital experience. But in the context now of coronavirus, there are going to be some different, and I would say really targeted types of steps that you can take. So from the outset, I just want to distinguish that there are these basic and overarching recommendations, and then there are really specific ones in the health information context. The reason we recommend that you take control of your digital experience is because I think a lot of times we all go on autopilot when we're online, and we do not take proactive measures to really be empowered to pick what we are looking at and what we're consuming. And so the first step in helping you become more empowered and proactive in seeking out what you're actually digesting is to take a stand of how you consume information. It's also distancing yourself is the truth. It's figuring out, wow, I spend 2 hours on Twitter every day. I have an alert personally for myself on Instagram that I can't spend more than 45 minutes a day on it, which you think sounds like a lot, and you could never reach it, and I often reach it. And I would encourage you to think about setting alerts for yourself like that to help just begin monitoring what you're doing, how you're online, and how often you're online. And then this final tip is the way we're approaching the inoculation component, you know, how we can't just be reactive, but how we can really begin guarding against being part of the problem in spreading disinformation. I'm so sorry. Let's see. So here are some of our really targeted tips, though, in the health information context. And what I like to say, it's kind of pithy and a little corny, is, you know, the way we're taking measures right now to protect our physical health against infection, I would almost try to create a similar process for you with your digital lives and your digital identity. So I think the first one is understand what you're seeing. People often will take what they're seeing as truth and not actually understand that, oh, this is just punditry. You know, what I'm looking at is someone on Twitter having a fantastic opinion, but it's an opinion. Or are you looking at news article links that people are posting on social media? Are you going regularly to New York Times or Fox News or The Guardian? Just begin to distinguish between the things that you're looking at. And the most basic distinction is between news and opinion. That is between information that is based on reporting, that is based on facts, and then information that is sort of spun. And it can be spun in controversial ways, in compelling ways, but it's really important to begin understanding those differences. 2 is check the credibility of the source. More and more, we are seeing these, what we're calling fake news outlets. They are imposter outlets. So here's a fake example, but Daily Buzz Live, I just pretend, sounds like a kind of legit website, and you may believe it. Many of these outlets, I'll have you know, have mastheads that kind of look really newsy. You know, the local Gazette. And you think, oh, well, the local Gazette reported on that saline is a solution that can help us kill coronavirus in our mouths if we gargle with it. Well, local Gazette might not actually be a legit news site. So check to see not only the sources of the stories that you're seeing, but if you actually want to share something at all, try to understand where it's coming from. So that can actually be through looking at the About Us on news sites, and it can be through just some basic Googling. I think the next step is taking a step back. And this is one of our more universal recommendations, frankly, but in the coronavirus context, it's especially urgent because we are, at least I am, more emotional. I am more freaked out by whatever it is I'm reading. And so the truth is I'm trying to take a step back. I'm questioning what are my reactions when I see something? Why might I be so moved by a certain piece? The truth is disinformation thrives on engagement. You know, it thrives on the virality of whatever the information is. So headlines are maybe not clickbait, but they're really close. You know, it's these headlines designed to encourage you to disseminate the post. And it's even encouraged when they're false and misleading. And I would say even more so. So don't take the bait. Question the credibility of what you're seeing, which really gets back to distinguishing between news and opinion and checking the credibility of the source. 4. And I will have you know, we only have 5 basic recommendations, and then we have a little pro tip for everyone. So before you share, and this is, I think, in the end, the most important one that I will reiterate forever, is fact check what you're reading. And before you share something, please fact check it. I am trying to now challenge myself that if I want to share something, I actually am not letting myself share it unless I have confirmed that it's real, and not just real as an authentic, but the veracity is something we can rely on. So what are some ways you can do this? One is the simplest Google search. And for those of you that are Luddites like me, and I have had to learn some of the different tools for fact checking, for reverse image searching, I will say, why don't you start with something really simple? When you put the article topic in Google to search whether it's real, also add the term true or false or hoax. And a lot of times for people, that can be a great entry point to just beginning to learn and really internalize a practice of checking information before you post it. So it's kind of an easy, like, introductory 101, but it's one of the best ways to start. And then finally, for the coronavirus context, when you are concerned about things, go to a credible health information website. A friend of mine, for example, and colleague, said that they were very worried about news. Maybe some of you have heard this, that people who have coronavirus but don't seem to have other symptoms like fever or coughing, news articles were proliferating that instead people actually were losing their sense of smell and sense of taste. And this friend of mine got understandably really freaked out because they couldn't smell anything. And they had been with a friend of theirs that they were worried also couldn't smell something. And a lot of that is just personal reaction. And I recommended to this colleague of mine, I said, well, why don't you go to the CDC website or to the World Health Organization website and check if there's anything on there? So he did, and he said, I didn't find anything on there. And I said, well, for now, don't digest that news article as gospel. Do not take that as the thing that will upset you more, because this is an extremely incendiary period where I think we are all at heightened emotional states. And right now what we need is less incendiary news headlines. We need more grounded in science. And I would say generally always go there if what you want to share is something that you think might help people. Make sure that what you're using, what you're sharing as advice is stuff that has been grounded in science and by health experts. And then I do have one just small pro tip. I guess before I get there, I wanted to provide you a list of fact-checking resources. I would say screenshot this. You're more than welcome. We're also going to be providing this webinar online, I think, and I know that ACS will provide some details. But if you want, here are some of the what I find to be the best fact-checking websites. FactCheck, for example, .org, that is through the Annenberg Public Policy Center at the University of Pennsylvania. It's nonpartisan. What it does is monitors for political accuracy, and it's a really useful tool. I'm not going to go through all of these, but I will note that one of the more interesting ones is Reporters Lab, which is at the bottom here. It's Duke Reporters Lab. And it's a database of both national and global fact-checking resources. It in and of itself is not an actual fact-checking website. But in the context of coronavirus now, where so much is crossing borders, both physically and online, I would recommend that you check out what their database of resources looks like if you're really curious, because I find it one of the most comprehensive lists. And then my final recommendation, okay, this is if you feel like you are excited and want to challenge yourself, is learn how to reverse image search. So what we joke around here, we say, the panicked grocery store shopper's image. I've seen a few of those. I'm sure some of you have. There are ways that you can install a Chrome browser tool, like it's called RevI Image Reverse Check. That's one of them, and I'm happy to send this after the webinar. These are different things that you can add to your online experience, and you can bookmark these things. I would say it's useful if you want to go the extra mile. For now, I would start with your fact-checking practices and try to hone those, try to make sure that those become second nature for you. And then frankly, I think we're at a good stopping point. Obviously, stay in touch with us and let me know if you have questions. One of our primary interests now is in developing very short resources for people to see these types of recommendations. So I will circulate for ACS to circulate to people links to a couple of those really, really short guides for you. And honestly, I would love to just hear what you all are experiencing and open it up for questions.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Nora. We really appreciate it. And we will be sure to follow up with people with these resources that Nora is sending, as well as anything else that we're able to get access to. So in terms of this question and answer, we have a few people that are submitting questions through text. And we can also, if you want to try to raise your hand, I can grant you microphone privileges so that you can ask your question kind of live and on the air, and maybe get a chance to be a little more kind of back and forth. So we have a few text questions. We have someone that would like to know if it's possible to go back to the slide listing the fact-checking sources. Nora, is that something that you'd be able to do?
Sure.
All right, perfect. And then we have another question. I don't see any hands raised. So this person is wondering, how completely should we trust the CDC in this time of the current administration?
Amazing question. I was reading earlier before the excuse me, the webinar about limits to of journalists' access to actually interview some of these scientists, which gives further credence to that type of question, like how influenced are some of our federal and government agents while they might be somehow muzzled. You know, I have not seen false information on these websites. And what I would say is the credible health information that you are reading on those, I would take as true. What I am more concerned by are ways that then that information is actually not being promoted. And at least with World Health Organization, so much from an algorithmic perspective is these posts on things like Twitter and Facebook, they're actually not getting a lot of play, which means people are not easily finding them. They have to proactively search for them. And I would just caution you that whatever it is you're seeing on those sites, I would take as credible, but then I would caution how news articles and how other types of secondary sources are maybe not correctly or accurately or fully accurately reporting on what that information is.
Perfect. And then the same person, kind of in a similar vein, had a question relating to we're seeing, I think, inaccurate information kind of promulgated at the highest levels of government. So how do fact and opinion and these other tools and strategies we have kind of factor in when, you know, coming from the highest levels of government, we have a lot of inaccurate information?
Well, you know, I don't think I have the silver bullet answer to that, because this is, you know, I struggle with always wanting to not recommend to people to simply become more skeptical. And yet we are now in this age of seeing our leaders espouse views that are perhaps questionable or offensive, which is one thing, but then we are now, I think, seeing more troubling issues of views being promoted based on false information. And, you know, this is just the world we live in, which means that a lot of what we're seeing, we should tune out, that we should sort of, some of our recommendations that I've laid out, let's see, is, you know, take a step back, think about what your reactions are to things. That includes press briefings. That includes the kind of propaganda that we're seeing from the White House is the real truth. Many journalists who have been trying to get into press briefings, for example, have been denied in the coronavirus task force briefings. And it's deeply troubling. It's something that in the next several weeks and months, I think we will see some officials actually, you know, make missteps, but not because they were ill-intentioned. I think a lot of local and state leaders are just doing their best right now to keep people safe. At least from a free expression perspective, one of our main questions right now is what's going to happen to people's ability to engage and to express themselves. And obviously we are going to see limits on that, from the ability to literally just go outside. But there are other instances where I think leaders may not just make missteps by you know, trying to do a good job as leaders. I think we will see some try to actively, and we are already seeing some, like our president, actively suppress credible information. And I wish I had a good answer for it. I think that's much more a discussion topic, and it's much more something for ACS to think about how we're implementing interesting programming to make people more aware of it.
Perfect, thank you. And folks, please feel free, you've got about 5 or 6 minutes left. Please continue to submit questions either through the question and answer app or to raise your hand so that we can bring you in. Otherwise, Nora, I have a question kind of related to a lot of what we talked about. Obviously, the folks that are on this call are really, really interested in ensuring that they have kind of a diverse media diet and are analyzing facts and information as they come in. But I'm sure it's a common experience for us to have family members or friends or loved ones who are not as discerning and are perhaps not as interested in learning how to be discerning. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts or tips or strategies to kind of engage people in this conversation, in the conversation of disinformation and misinformation, who perhaps don't want to participate.
I think that's an excellent question. And I would caution people, some people say, I think the line is, Thanksgiving was bad for my health. I had to deal with my crazy relatives who just promote propaganda. That's a line I've heard a lot. Or Christmas was bad for my health because of that. I would say, start from the premise that it's wonderful to try to engage people if they're coming from different ideological perspectives and backgrounds. One of the best ways that I have known or sort of seen conversation openers is through talking about just all of our experiences online. Asking family members where they spend their time most. Is it Facebook? And then it's a great segue to talk about some of those issues around micro-targeting. Like, oh, well, did you know actually that some of what we all see is different from what everyone else sees? So you may be getting certain types of content tailored to you, and it's different. And what it does is it stokes polarization. And as much as our work on PEN America's side has really, until now, actually focused in this disinformation space on the political effects of disinformation, there are these other hotspots, and those are entry points to talk about the effect. So health information is one. We know that reproductive justice is another kind of hotbed where there is more disinformation spread. Science, climate change, those are all areas where it's sort of like more likely perhaps to see more disinformation. And some of the ways to just begin letting family members or others in your life know about tools such as, why don't you understand what you're seeing? Begin distinguishing between news and opinion. Check the credibility of sources. I think some of those are going to be much more sophisticated practices that some of you might be able to implement easier. And if people are only just beginning to think about what these issues mean, they may not be ready or even very open to doing that yet. And so what I would say is start really simple by just beginning to open the conversation up for people to know what these different terms mean and how it benefits us to feel like we can take charge of our online experience. Because when you think about it that way, it actually is incredibly moving and can mobilize people so that they say, you're right, I actually haven't gone about researching any of what I'm reading. I am passively just accepting what I'm looking at. And I'm conscious of time, but I will say, Jake, to your question, I will make sure to forward the really short guide we've just put together on disinformation and media literacy in the context of COVID, to make sure that if there is an opportunity for you guys to share these types of things with friends, with your social media following, or with family members, I would absolutely do so.
Perfect. Thanks, Nora. And then I have one last question. It's something that I like to ask anyone and everyone that we've been kind of engaging in these virtual calls. But that's, what are the points of optimism? What are the points of hope in this space? What are the things that we can kind of hold on to, even when the rest of the world is dark, and say, like, at least this thing is going well, or at least this gives us hope for the future? If there is anything, and I'm hoping there is.
Well, of course there is. I mean, I think some of it actually is, if we're reticent to believe what we see, we should be very inspired and heartened right now by the journalists actually that are in hyper-local communities on the front lines trying to undo the kind of distrust that we're seeing on the part of people who just reject media generally. It's really tremendous. We are currently now monitoring the student journalists that are working on making sure that college students on campuses, which have shut down, shuttered, and students are, many of them, incredibly terrified right now. Student journalists are on the front lines reporting on the coronavirus. In other contexts, we are seeing journalists trying to debunk the way our leaders are weaponizing information to mislead the public. It is extremely heartening, actually. And many organizations, news organizations, have taken down paywalls to be able to try to help promote that what we should be doing during this time is not just passively accepting information, but really trying to build community and to build the wraparound services and practices to be able to combat what we're seeing. Because I think many of us are just in a sober place where we know it is not going to get better probably for some time. And in the middle of that, there is sort of this opportunity to promote really positive storytelling and positive digital practices.
Perfect. Well, Nora, thank you so much for joining today. I think we all I know I did, learned a lot about kind of the current digital news landscape that we're all living in. Thank you to everyone who joined. We'll be sure to follow up sometime in the next day or two with more of these resources that Nora talked about and some more resources from ACS. But for now, stay safe, stay healthy, and wishing you all the best. Thank you for joining today.
Thank you.